Until recently, the safest assumption in American air power was that stealth still gave the United States room to disappear. China's sensor web is becoming an F-35 problem because that assumption is starting to come under pressure, not because China built one miracle radar that can suddenly see through stealth. That version is simpler, and it is also wrong. What seems to be changing is larger than that. Around China's coastline and out into contested waters, more pieces are starting to connect. New radar sites, more airborne early warning coverage, more passive detection claims, more satellite surveillance, more signs that Beijing is not chasing one breakthrough at all. It is trying to connect many imperfect sensors into something operationally useful. That is a much bigger problem, because the F-35 was never invisible. Even its own program does not describe it that way. Stealth lowers detection range, complicates targeting, and forces an enemy to work harder. It creates uncertainty. And for years, that uncertainty gave the United States a huge advantage. Now the question is whether China is finding ways to reduce it. And this is where one small island suddenly starts to matter a lot more than it should. Because if China is closing the gaps between its sensors, then the real question is no longer whether one radar can find an F-35. It is what happens when even American stealth starts running out of blind spots. That question starts with a place most viewers had probably never heard of, Triton Island. On paper, it is just one small feature in the Paracel Islands, not the kind of place that should matter to the F-35 or to American air power more broadly. And that is exactly why it matters. Because the strongest version of the story is not that China built some new radar on a remote island and suddenly changed the balance overnight. That would be dramatic. It would also miss the point. What made Triton important was where it appeared in the larger picture. Satellite imagery and follow-up analysis pointed to China expanding the island into a radar and signals intelligence site. By itself, that is already significant. But analysts looking at the map noticed something more important. Triton sits between Hainan Island and Subi Reef. In other words, this was not just another outpost. It looked a lot more like a new node in a wider surveillance chain. And once you see it that way, the story changes fast. Because one radar can be dismissed. One radar can be avoided. One radar can be jammed, deceived, or destroyed. A shrinking gap is different. That is the part that should make people in Washington uncomfortable. For years, the safer assumption was that stealth aircraft still had room to work with around China. Maybe not everywhere. Maybe not freely. But enough room to create uncertainty, exploit seams, and force defenders to guess. Triton suggests China is spending real effort trying to reduce those seams. Not with one breakthrough, with overlap. That does not mean Triton alone can track an F-35 across the South China Sea. It does not mean one island radar has solved the stealth problem. The more credible conclusion is narrower and, in some ways, more serious than that. China appears to be building a surveillance architecture where each new site matters less as an individual weapon and more as a way to tighten the space between other sensors. That is what makes this different from the usual defense headline. The radar is not the main reveal. The map is. And once the map starts to change, the next question gets harder. If China is trying to close the spaces between its sensors, then stealth is no longer dealing with one threat at a time. It is dealing with an airspace that may be getting less forgiving year by year, because the public version of stealth has always been a little too clean. Either the aircraft is invisible or it is exposed. Either the radar sees it or it does not. Either the advantage holds or it collapses. Real air power does not work that way. The F-35 was never built on the promise of invisibility. Even Lockheed Martin does not describe it like that. The jet was built to make an enemy's job harder, at every stage that matters. Harder to detect, harder to classify, harder to track, harder to target, and much harder to kill. That distinction matters more than most headlines admit. Because when people say a radar can detect stealth, they often compress an entire kill chain into one word. Detection is one thing. Tracking is another. Holding a stable track is another. Turning that track into weapons quality targeting is another. Then comes launch. Then guidance. Then whatever happens in the final seconds, when the target is maneuvering, jamming, changing altitude, or disappearing into clutter. That is a long chain. And stealth was designed to break it. For years, that gave the United States a level of confidence that was easy to understand. Even if China had more radars, or longer-range radars, or lower-frequency radars, the harder part was always turning a faint return into something operationally useful. That was the comfort built into the system. Stealth did not need to hide perfectly. It only needed to inject enough doubt, enough delay, and enough instability to keep the rest of the chain from working cleanly. That is why the current shift matters. China does not appear to be trying to solve this with one magical sensor. It is trying to reduce uncertainty from multiple directions at once. A low-frequency radar might only suggest that something is there. A passive receiver might catch an angle a conventional radar misses. An airborne early warning aircraft might watch the corridor from above. A satellite might spot the activity around the mission before the mission even starts. None of that by itself defeats stealth, but that is the point. The problem begins when those partial clues stop staying partial. Because once enough weak signals start pointing in the same direction, the defender may not need a perfect picture at the start. It may only need enough confidence to narrow the search area, reposition sensors, prepare interceptors, or push the aircraft into a less favorable route. And if that is where China is heading, then the F-35 problem is no longer about whether stealth works. It is about whether stealth still creates enough uncertainty to keep the whole system off balance. So what does that pressure actually look like? Not one super radar, a stack of imperfect eyes. This is the part a lot of coverage gets wrong. It treats China's sensor web like a single invention waiting to be revealed. One breakthrough, one classified system, one dramatic moment where stealth suddenly stops mattering. On paper, that sounds incredible. In practice, that is not how this works. China's approach looks much more methodical than that. Long-range ground radars can watch wide sectors and provide early warning. Low-frequency systems may be better at noticing certain low observable targets, but they usually come with a trade-off. They can see more broadly, yet often less precisely. Passive detection systems create a different kind of problem. Instead of broadcasting their own signal, they can use emissions and geometry the target does not fully control. Airborne early warning aircraft change the angle again, looking down from altitude instead of searching from the ground. Satellites push the picture even farther out, watching bases, runways, carrier groups, tanker patterns, and movement before the aircraft even reaches a contested zone. Each of those systems has limits. That is what makes the overall strategy more credible, not less. Because China does not need every sensor to do everything. It needs each sensor to add something. A low-frequency radar may only hint that something unusual is moving through a corridor. A passive system may not generate a firing solution, but it may catch a reflection from an angle stealth shaping does not handle as well. A KJ-500 in the air can watch from above the curvature and terrain limits that constrain ground radars. A satellite does not need to track the F-35 in flight to matter. If it sees the tanker pattern, the runway activity, or the support buildup before launch, it is already feeding the operation. And this is where the shape of the problem changes. The target is no longer just the aircraft in the air. It is the pattern around it. That is a much bigger attack surface. Tankers are easier to see. AWACS aircraft are easier to see. Carriers are easier to watch. Air bases leave signatures. Logistics leaves signatures. Data links and emissions can leave signatures. Even when the stealth jet itself stays difficult to pin down, the operation around it can become easier to anticipate. This is why the phrase counter-stealth can be misleading. It makes the story sound like radar versus airplane. It is broader than that. What China appears to be building is a system that tries to make U.S. air operations more cautious, more route-dependent, more support-dependent, and more expensive. The wind condition is not necessarily a clean track on the F-35 from the beginning. The wind condition may be earlier warning, a narrower search box, a more predictable route, a tanker force farther back. An operation that becomes less flexible before the first missile is even in the air. That is the part Western audiences should pay attention to. Because once a country can combine ground radars, passive systems, airborne warning aircraft, satellites, and electronic intelligence into the same operational picture, the question changes. It is no longer, can China see the stealth jet clearly enough right now? It is whether China can build enough pressure around the mission that stealth starts losing freedom even before it loses concealment. Because once China starts relying on many sensors working together, the real question is no longer just what each radar can see. It is whether the whole system can stay connected under pressure. That sounds like a strength. It is also a vulnerability. A radar can work on its own and still be useful. A sensor web is different. It depends on timing, communications, data links, processing, command decisions, and the ability to move information fast enough that it still matters by the time arrives. If any of those pieces break, the picture starts to thin out. The clues are still there, but they stop adding up the way they are supposed to. And this is where things get harder for both sides. For China, the challenge is not just fielding more radars, more aircraft, or more satellites. It is turning them into a wartime network that can survive jamming, cyber disruption, missile strikes, false tracks, decoys, and the sheer confusion of a real fight. A surveillance system in peacetime can look impressive. A surveillance system under attack is a different test. That matters because some of the most visible pieces of this network are also the easiest to target. Fixed radar sites can be mapped. Forward outposts can be struck. Communication nodes can be jammed or overloaded. Even a good system can start losing value if its operators are forced to sort real tracks from false ones at speed. That is the hidden constraint in the whole story. China may be building a more crowded sensor environment, but the more connected that environment becomes, the more it depends on staying coordinated when the United States is actively trying to blind, confuse, and fragment it. And the United States is not built to sit there and absorb that pressure passively. If China is trying to reduce uncertainty through networking, then the U.S. answer is likely to focus on breaking the network itself. Not just with stealth, but with electronic attack, cyber pressure, decoys, standoff weapons, and systems designed to force Chinese sensors to waste attention on the wrong thing. So the balance here is more unstable than it looks. China does not need a perfect sensor web to create problems for the F-35, but it does need a sensor web that can keep functioning once the shooting starts. And that is why the story is not heading toward a simple ending where one side finally sees everything. It is heading toward a fight over whose network fails first. And that brings us to the real answer. China's sensor web is becoming an F-35 problem. Not because China has proved it can see stealth clearly all the time. And not because one radar somewhere in the South China Sea suddenly made America's best fighters obsolete. It is becoming a problem because it changes the cost of uncertainty. For a long time, the United States had counted on stealth to create enough ambiguity that even a dense air defense environment stayed hard to organize in real time. A radar might detect something. A commander might suspect something. But suspicion is not the same as a usable picture, and a usable picture is not the same as pressure on the whole mission. That is the gap China appears to be working on, not the gap between seeing everything and seeing nothing. The gap between having fragments and turning those fragments into action. If China can keep narrowing that gap, then the effect reaches well beyond one jet. Tankers may have to stay farther back. Support aircraft may need more protection. Routes may become less flexible. Strike packages may need more electronic attack, more deception, more decoys, and more coordination just to do work that once depended more heavily on stealth alone. That does not mean the F-35 stops mattering. If anything, it proves the opposite. Stealth is still one of the most important advantages the United States has, because it keeps every part of the enemy's kill chain under strain. But this is exactly why China's sensor web matters. It is an attempt to reduce that strain, piece by piece, until stealth is still dangerous, still useful, still survivable, but no longer is free. And that is the strategic shift hiding underneath all of this. The future air war near China may not be decided by the side with the single best aircraft. It may be decided by the side that can hold its network together longer, see the broader pattern faster, and force the other side to spend more of the mission just protecting the mission itself. That is why this story matters now. Because if China is building a system designed to make stealth less liberating, then America's answer may not be one better fighter, or one better radar, or one more secret program. It may be a different way of fighting entirely. One where the real contest is no longer aircraft versus aircraft, but network versus network. And the side that loses freedom first may lose far more than the first engagement.